All right, today we're talking about a revolution. But forget cannons and armies. This one was fought with words. It's the wild story of how one single document, a simple preface to a book of poems, completely flipped the script on literature forever. So let's get into it.
So let me ask you something to get started. What if the most powerful, most honest poetry isn't hidden away in some fancy palace, but it's out there, in a farmer's field? What if real truth isn't complicated? This was the crazy idea that was about to shake everything up.
And the year this whole thing exploded? 1800. That's the year William Wordsworth published his preface to the lyrical ballads. And this wasn't just an introduction. It became the manifesto for a brand new way of thinking, of writing, and really of seeing the entire world. Okay, so to really get how big of a deal this was, we first have to look at what Wordsworth was fighting against. We need to understand the world he was trying to tear down. Let's call it poetry's gilded cage.
You see, back in the 18th century, poetry was, well, it was kind of a stuffy, exclusive club. It was all about super strict, complicated rules. The language was really formal and, honestly, totally artificial. Nobody actually talked like that. And the topics? Always these grand mythological stories or big historical events. Not exactly relatable stuff.
So look at that column on the left. That's the old guard, artificial, complicated, and written for a tiny elite. Wordsworth comes along, sees all this, and thinks, no way. He saw an art form that had totally lost touch with real human feeling. And his vision for what poetry could be, well, it was the exact opposite.
You know, here's a good way to picture it. The poetry back then was like one of those old formal oil paintings. Yeah, you can admire the skill, for sure. It's technically impressive. But it's also kind of stiff, right? A little cold. It doesn't really capture the messy, vibrant, actual feeling of being alive. So, how do you break out of a cage like that? Wordsworth's answer wasn't to create a new set of rules or another complicated formula. Nope, it was something way simpler and way, way more powerful. It was all about feeling. This quote right here is the absolute heart of the revolution. Wordsworth's big idea was that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Think about that. He's saying poetry shouldn't start in your brain with rules and logic. It has to start in your gut with real, raw, powerful emotion. The whole game just moved from the head to the heart.
But hold on. It wasn't just about, screaming your feelings onto the page. There was a crucial second part to his idea, a little something he called recollection in tranquility. What he meant was you have this intense emotional experience, but then later, when you're calm, you reflect on it, you think it through, and that's when you shape that raw feeling into powerful art. So it's the best of both worlds. It's passionate and it's thoughtful. Now, Wordsworth didn't just drop that one big idea and walk away. In his preface, he actually laid out a full-on guide, a manifesto, really, for what this new, emotionally honest kind of poetry should be. He basically broke it down into 3 core principles. And these weren't just vague theories. This was a practical game plan, a call to action for writers everywhere. Okay, first up, the language. He said, forget all that fancy, fake poetic jargon. Just throw it out. Instead, use the kind of language that real, ordinary people actually speak. He especially thought the language of people living simple lives close to nature was the most pure and honest. It was all about being authentic, not about being artificially artistic. Principle 2 was about what to write about. Wordsworth said, enough with the epic battles and the Greek gods. The real magic, the real power is in the everyday stuff. The feeling you get on a walk through the woods, or the quiet struggles of a local farmer, or the simple wonder of a child. He wanted to show us the extraordinary hiding inside the ordinary. And third, poetry needed to have a purpose, a real mission. Wordsworth was worried that the new industrial world was making people numb, disconnecting them from nature and even from their own emotions. He saw poetry as the cure. Its job was to wake us back up, to make us feel deeply again, to reconnect us with what it means to be human. Poetry wasn't just entertainment, it was like therapy for the soul. So Wordsworth puts this radical vision out into the world. But what happened next? Why are we still talking about this thing more than 200 years later? Well, let's get into the incredible legacy of this manifesto because it is huge. The impact was just massive. Seriously. The preface basically became the founding document for the entire English Romantic movement. It completely changed the goal of poetry. It wasn't about being clever anymore. It was about being sincere.
It put individual emotion, nature, and simplicity right at the center of literature. And it totally changed how we think of a poet, not as some detached craftsman, but as a deeply feeling person, just like us.
So if you boil it all down, here's the real takeaway. Wordsworth's revolution was about democratizing poetry. He took it from the ivory tower and gave it back to everybody. He made the incredible argument that the deepest, most profound truths aren't locked away in fancy books. They're right here, in the simplest moments of our lives, if we just pay attention.
And that brings us to a question for right now. Wordsworth worried about society dulling our minds. I mean, in our world of constant notifications, endless scrolling, and just digital noise, doesn't that feel more relevant than ever? So the question is, where can we find our own quiet place, our own tranquility, to actually stop and make sense of what we feel?